What they do basically is they train primarily giant African pouch rats, a species named Crises and to detect landmines and other explosive remnants of war. Landmines are a hazard in 59 different countries. They cause a substantial number of deaths. They cause more injuries. These are anti-personnel mines. They aren't intended to kill people. They're intended to wound people. Because if you wound somebody, you don't just take out one person, right? You take out the person who's wounded and then all the people who care for that individual. I think first, find something you enjoy, right? Find some aspect of behavior analysis that resonates for you. Something that you do well, develop the skills you need, and then just keep sharpening those skills. But as you use those skills, keep your eyes open, right? I mean, there's all kinds of opportunities, but sometimes you have to step outside your comfort zone. And the best way to do that is to join a team, I mean, sort out like what you have to offer. And when you have a chance, offer it. Don't come up to people with your hat in your hand and say, hey, would you help me? Come up and say, hey, I have a little something to offer. Maybe we could work together.
Hey everybody, welcome to Cooperant Learning. I'm Kyle Steary, your host. With me, as always, in this Arctic blast, this date and this time is Dr. Steve Sparks. Dr. Steve, how are you doing?
Not bad. Dodging accidents, getting the car taken in because of the cold weather, just life in the Midwest during a freeze.
We were talking about that beforehand, how there's a lot of reasons for alarm, but in many regards, it does just kind of seem like par for the course. Midwest, one day it's happy springish weather, and suddenly we're sitting by the wood stove because the power's out. So
yeah.
Well, with us today is an amazing guest. I'm really excited to have him on. I'll do a brief introduction here. He's a professor in the Department of Psychology at Western Michigan University, where he serves as the Behavior Analysis Program Chair. He received his master's degree from West Virginia University and a PhD from the University of Minnesota. He's a fellow at the Association for Behavior Analysis International and Divisions 3, 25, and 28 of the American Psychological Association. He's published 12 books and over 350 articles and book chapters. Alongside his PhD recipients for whom he served as advisor and other colleagues, he's conducted research and done conceptual work in several areas, including behavioral pharmacology, clinical psychopharmacology, applied behavior analysis, gender issues, animal welfare, quantitative analysis, learning processes, research methods, and scent detection. Dr. Al Poling, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and that was all before breakfast, so he's got it handled.
How are things up in your neck of the woods, Al?
Oh, they're great. It's like you say, it's winter, and that's what you expect. And so things are fine.
Good.
As long as you don't look too broadly.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm excited to talk about a number of topics today. The APOPO project is something that I would be kind of really interested in diving into first. As I was telling you before, in my graduate studies, it was one of those things that we talked about as being one of the big picture kind of applications of ABA outside of kind of what we're known for. When you Google ABA, it's not something that necessarily pops up. But challenge to think big picture about ABA and like, oh, the APOPO project. What a cool project. So you were a big part of that. Would love to know just kind of, one, for anybody who doesn't know what APOPO is, and then two, kind of how you got involved with them.
Sure. APOPO is a Belgian NGO. Their mission is to use scent detection animals to make the world better for humanity. And I got involved with them really just through a fluke. In 2007, I was sitting in my office talking to a graduate student, and I received an email forwarded from a colleague, Cindy Pietras, and it was advertising a position in Mozambique for a behavior analyst who would work on projects training giant pouch rats to detect explosives in human tuberculosis. And the student and I had a laugh. We thought, giant pouch rats. Like, we'd never heard of these things. And so we checked, and lo and behold, there is this organization. And in those days, it was a fledgling organization. And he said, well, why don't you apply? I always wanted to go to Africa. So I thought, well, what would it hurt? So I put together an application. And in those days, you sent it through the mail. And I waited and waited and waited, and I didn't hear anything. So this same student came back 2.5, 3 months later and said, did you hear anything from APOPO? And I said, not a damn word. So they didn't even have the decency to send me a rejection. I said, man, it's Tanzania. Like, maybe things fell through the crack. I said, why don't you write to them? And of course, I was a little bit prideful, like, nah, they don't even have the decency to contact me. I'm not going to suck up to them. But I swallowed my pride, and I sent them a letter, and they said, oh, we lost your application. Send this to CV. So I did. And make a long story short, they invited me for an interview. I really liked it, and I got involved. And I started working there in either late 2007, early 2008. And my students and I worked there pretty much through 2016, and I still have contact with the organization. So what they do basically is they train primarily giant African pouch rats, a species named Crises and to detect landmines and other explosive remnants of war. Landmines are a hazard in 59 different countries. They cause a substantial number of deaths. They cause more injuries. These are anti-personnel mines. They aren't intended to kill people. They're intended to wound people. Because if you wound somebody, you don't just take out one person, right? You take out the person who's wounded and then all the people who care for that individual. So they do a lot of damage. They often blow off limbs. They damage the genitals. They're horrible. But another thing they do is they deprive people of access to valuable land. Because if you think land is contaminated with explosives, well, you don't farm it. You don't access it for any reason. So they're really a scourge. And years ago, 25 years ago, actually, that's when APOPO was founded. A young Belgian product developer named Bart Vichens wanted to do something to help people in sub-Saharan Africa. So he started thinking about, well, what could he do? And he tried a couple things, and they didn't work. And then he came across an idea that one of his classmates at university had introduced. And that was the idea of using some local animal to detect landmines. Lots of animals have a good sense of smell. And of course, dogs have long been used for various scent detection purposes. So Bart's classmate said, well, maybe there's some other critter that people could use, and didn't make anything of it. So Bart thought, well, maybe in sub-Saharan Africa, there is such a critter. So he contacted colleagues at the University of Antwerp, where he'd gone to school, who had worked at the Pest Management Center in Tanzania. And they said, yeah, there's a species there that has an acute sense of smell. It lives a relatively long time. It seems to be trainable. It's these pouch rats. Maybe they'll work. So Bart set to work with his colleagues to sort out a way to train these pouch rats. And these people weren't behavior analysts. They were ethologists and animal behaviors. But they developed a workable training system. And first, they developed it in Belgium, but they wanted to work in sub-Saharan Africa. So they needed a place that was safe and accessible. And they already had contacts in Morogoro, Tanzania at the University of Sokoine. So Bart managed to establish contacts there, and he set up a little lab. And they convinced the Tanzanian military to build a training field for them, where they planted about 1,100 diffused landmines on about a 50-acre field, and the locations of those landmines were known. So that gave Bart and his colleagues, and there are just a handful of them, another Belgian guy, Christoph Cox, and 3 local Tanzanian people, they started to work to see if we can actually get these rats to find landmines under a simulated natural condition. And lo and behold, they could.
Wow.
But they were having trouble convincing people that these rats could do anything. And it was a hard sell to get money to keep this project going. They had to depend on donors and so forth. And that's about when I came into the picture. They'd gotten to the point where they'd started a little pilot project in Mozambique, which is a country that adjoins Tanzania. There aren't any landmines in Tanzania. Tanzania has been a relatively peaceful country, and that's one reason Bart and Christoph went there. But adjoining countries have trouble. So they started a little project in Mozambique, and they brought me on board to work on various projects. One was a project where people tried to use rats and dogs to remotely detect explosives. It's called remote explosive scent tracing. A South African country reported that they could use dogs for that purpose, and they claimed to have cleared tens of thousands of acres. Well, to make a long story short, it's bullshit. It
Wow.
doesn't work.
Huh.
But they made lots of money.
Sure.
And if you know anything about where mines are placed, you can make pretty good guesses about areas where there won't be any mines. And it seemed to be the case that was what they were doing. So I didn't
Wow.
do much on the RISC project. I just kind of said, this is not going to go anywhere. What else can we do? So it ended up that there seemed to be 3 areas where I might be able to contribute something. One was sorting out how well are the rats doing in detecting explosives. By that time, they'd also started to use the rats to detect human tuberculosis. Years ago, back in the 1800s, people reported people with tuberculosis, TB, often had a funny tarry odor on their breath. And Bart knew about that, and he reasoned, well, if people can smell this, right, surely the rats could smell it. So they developed a laboratory technique where the rats smelled sputum, and they were trained to pause above samples that were positive for TB, for the bacillus that causes it, Mycobacterium tuberculosis. And so they had that just getting started, but they weren't sure how well it worked. They weren't exactly sure how well the rats were doing. So one thing that I thought I could help with was like evaluating their 2 products. The other thing was, well, once we had baseline data, how could we improve things? So that was kind of the second focus. And then the third thing is, well, are there any other applications? Anything else these scent detection rats could be used to do? So I started working on those things. And they had done a little bit of work with a couple other behavior analysts, and they hadn't had a good experience. I'd been there for a couple years, and Christoph and I were having some beer, and he said, I have to tell you something. Said, I'm really surprised, said, that you got things done and you're a nice guy. He said, the other behavior analysts were assholes.
That checks out.
He said they were arrogant. They told us what to do, even though they knew nothing about it. He said, you've come in, you've been a team player, and you've contributed. Sometimes you've led, sometimes you've followed. And I was really happy to hear that, because that's a tack I've always tried to take. Like sort out what skills you have and combine those skills with the skills of other people. Then maybe you can get something done. And the people at APOPO had a wealth of skills, but I had some skills that maybe they didn't have to the same extent. So I just tried to pitch in, where I could. I helped design and conduct studies. And soon enough, I got my students coming over there. 3 of my students did their PhD research in Tanzania. 2 of those people worked as directors of training and research, and they lived in Tanzania for years. Another woman did her master's work there. So initially, I stayed in Tanzania with my family, and I was there for about a year. And then I came back to Kalamazoo, but then I would go back episodically for weeks or months. And I did that for years. And we got a lot of work done. So I won't bore you with all the details, but the rats are really quite good at finding explosives. And the way they work is they wear a harness and they move back and forth across a rope that's stretched between, and the trainers move slowly down safe lanes. They've been cleared of landmines with metal detectors. And then the rats go back and forth between them. And the rats are trained to scratch when they detect an explosive. And when a rat scratches, then the trainer marks the location on a grid with XY coordinates. And then subsequently, they check that area with a metal detector. And if they find a landmine, then at first they just dig them up, which
Oh, wow.
was scary as heck to watch. Like
Yeah.
these, I mean, these are live landmines, and they just dig them out with garden tools, basically. But later they started to explode them in place.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Is it like Bugs Bunny? You just throw the rock and see if it goes off, or that's what I'd picture.
Yeah, no, they put little charges, but humanitarian demining is kind of a macho activity, and some of the people are rather brave, but it's dangerous. It's hard, dangerous work. And one thing APOPO has always been is committed to locals. So they train local people to do the landmine detecting, but and the tuberculosis detection, train the rats. They treat the employees well. They give them opportunity for advancement. They had the first all-female demining team in the world. So we made some small contributions to that. We demonstrated that the rats could do a bunch of other things. We developed an application where they were trained to find people trapped in debris.
Okay.
Just now, APOPO is about ready to use rats operationally for that purpose.
Wow.
The rats, they're about 18 inches long. They weigh 3 or 4 pounds. They're nocturnal burrowing animals, so they're well suited to go through and under things. And so that was the notion that they might be good for finding people trapped under rubble. We demonstrated that they could find diseases other than tuberculosis. They could detect salmonella, for instance. We demonstrated that they can be trained to find a whole bunch of different kinds of contraband. Now the rats are being used to find smuggled hardwoods in various parts of sub-Saharan Africa, and also wildlife, especially pangolins. Pangolins are those weird-looking animals. They're mammals, but they have scales.
Yeah.
And people think the scales have magical properties. So there's an active trait in pangolins. And so the rats basically can just go through cargo, and they can detect pangolins, and they can detect lion skins and elephant ivory and various hardwoods and so forth. So they're being used for that purpose. They're starting to be used for port security. They can find illicit drugs. They can climb through cargo pretty easily. But the main application really is in landmine detection.
Yeah.
They started out in Mozambique. Since then, they've worked in 13 different countries. They've cleared about 100 million square meters of land, which is a lot. They're used to detect tuberculosis in 2 countries, in Ethiopia and Tanzania. They've detected about 35,000 cases. Tuberculosis is really a scourge. I didn't know this till I worked at APOPO, but about 2 billion people have latent TB, that is, they've been exposed to it. That's no problem if your immune system works. The immune system just walls off the bacilli and they don't cause any trouble. But if anything goes wrong with your immune system, then it's just a horrible disease.
Yeah.
They used to call it consumption because it just does seem to eat you away. kills about 1 million people a year. And so it's a big deal. Now, the rats are much better than the common technique that's used in research poor countries, sputum smear microscopy. And it's really slow. A microscopist can do about 20 samples a day at most. A rat can do 20 samples in 20 minutes. Or no, they can
Jeez.
do 100 samples in 20
Wow.
minutes. So they're much faster. But there are other techniques better if you can afford them. But the problem
Are
is afford them.
are they able to detect it even in like the latent people as well, those that have it but are not being affected, or just an active illness?
Just active.
Okay.
Just active, yeah. In some places, like in Tanzania, you can almost assume that everybody there's been exposed to it.
Wow.
It's the spores are really robust. So if somebody spits, can lie in the dust for weeks, and then somebody comes along, kicks up the dust, and breathes it in,
Hmm.
and end up getting
Jeez.
TB.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most of my knowledge and experience is just from watching like old westerns and hearing old stories from back when the United States had the major issue, and so you don't even
You
think of
know,
it being an issue somewhere else still to that extent.
yeah, no, it's a huge issue. TB kills more people worldwide than any other infectious disease.
Wow.
Uh, Recently, it's past COVID and HIV.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But in resource rich countries, we don't even think about it. Like you say, I mean, it's something that like 150 years ago was a problem, but it isn't anymore. It's like malaria. Um, so, so we were really fortunate to do a bunch of different things there. I think one thing we contributed is uh, fairly rigorous research, and I say fairly rigorous because APOPO's intent is to do humanitarian services, right? To make the world a better place, not to do research. So we always had to embed our research into that context, and we had to make it practical. And that's what a good behavior analyst does, right? They say, well, what
Yeah.
is your goal and what are your resources? And how do you best yield those resources to attain those goals? And that's what my students and I and our colleagues at APOPO tried to do with respect to research, right? Like, how can we get meaningful data without compromising the necessary activities of APOPO, which are detecting explosives and detecting tuberculosis? And we had considerable success at that. But of course, we had lots of challenges. I mean, it's hard to do research anywhere, and in
Hmm.
on a landmine field, it's really hard.
Going
And
back to your statement about behavior analysts and being assholes, do you find that you sacrifice maybe some like of the jargon and some of the the purest behaviorist in order to meet them where they're at and collaborate with other disciplines in that regard? Is that kind of how that collaboration occurred, and like what do you attribute that to?
yeah, I mean, inevitably, like jargon has a role in the specialized audiences, but outside that, it's just off-putting.
Mhm.
I think some behavior analysts, and this is a good thing, they're so committed to the discipline and to our view of how behavior is controlled that they're dismissive of alternative views, and they get really caught up in the verbiage. They don't realize that other people can do good things and they can generate good data. They just may talk about those good things and those data in ways that seem strange to us, ways that seem inappropriate. And I think many behavior analysts are actually trained to take umbrage when that happens, right? I know. I mean, I was trained a long, long time ago, but one thing that, especially at West Virginia, uh, I would see is people would get up on another's nose, right? If you used the term incorrectly and if you reinforced an organism, not a response and so forth.
Behavior.
And so we're trained to do that. And I think also, not to speak badly of anybody, but some of our major players were kind of intentionally iconoclasts, and they didn't necessarily play nicely. I mean, think about Skinner, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was pretty brash
So
in his dismissal. I mean, you write a book called Beyond Freedom and Dignity. Well, I mean, what's
Yeah.
important to humanity, right? Freedom and dignity, like that's in your face.
Right.
his
And-
farewell speech there was a little bit off-putting. I think everybody outside our science as well. So
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that served me well is even though I'm trained in behavior analysis, I'm also more broadly trained. So, I've always had contact with a considerable range of academics, and that's probably been a benefit. And I think also just my upbringing, like I was taught to be humble. Don't
Right.
take yourself too seriously. Like do your best, right? But realize, there are bigger dogs in the pack, and
Right.
that doesn't mean that you can't play a role, but so can other people.
yeah, I've
So,
always said this: no one can ever be the best at science. It just doesn't exist. And also, no matter what you try to be the best at, there's always gonna be someone better. So why even let that eat away at you like that?
yeah, no, I mean, I think the secret is try to constantly improve yourself and improve the world. When I mean, the APOPO thing was important, but really, it was just one of a whole bunch of different things that my students and I have done. Like, I started out doing mostly drug research, but, we always did basic research, EAB research. I've always been committed to the well-being of historically disadvantaged people. So years ago, we started collecting data, looking at the status of women in behavior analysis. And, it's been pretty poor. And, we've argued over the years that that's basically crap.
Yeah.
Like if
Yeah.
you look at levels of prestige in the field, different positions, well, as you move up the prestige ladder, you see fewer and fewer and fewer women. Now that's changing in recent years, but it didn't used to be. And an interesting thing happened. I think we published our first paper in this area in like 1982, and we've episodically published papers in that domain since. Reviewers and editors, when we say this is bullshit, they often say, well, you don't know that, right? Don't go beyond your data. Just present your data. Just present your data. And more and more as I've gotten older and I've had the freedom, I've been committed to the role of scientist advocate, where if your data have implications for the world, then you as a scientist are honor bound to point out those implications.
Mm.
Several of us did a study some years ago where we looked at the pay of men and women at all the behavior analytic programs for which we could find data. Well, what would you guess we found?
I'm
I'm
guessing
scared to guess.
pretty big discrepancy.
At every level,
75%.
pretty big discrepancy. On average, about $8,000. At each of the levels, assistant, associate, and full professor, the lowest paid person was a woman. The highest paid person was a man, and so on. And we said, this is garbage, right?
Yeah.
Like something's going on here. But guess what? The editor said, you don't know that, right? Maybe the men are more qualified. Maybe the men have been in their positions longer. Yada, yada. Well, maybe, right? But if you believe that, then you provide data to show it, right? Just on the face of it, just given what we know, this is not good, right? And given what we know about the treatment of women in general, right, probably reflects bias. Now, we don't know
Yeah.
that, right? But I think we should at least call attention to that fact. So we've kind of tried to advocate for people as best we can.
Going back
And
to your mention beyond freedom and dignity, and it seems like instead of listening and saying, we are trying to give groups of people who are disadvantaged or being mistreated some dignity. Instead, it's like, hey, that affects my dignity when you try to give them more. And that it seems to be illogical, a silly battle, really, but it is. And I always tell people, like, if you look for the groups, like the fact that there's a women in behavior analysis group tells us that, they're fighting a battle that we should all be trying to support, because obviously they're put at disadvantages compared to us as white male, middle class, what have you, that
Yep.
sort of thing.
No, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. If I've been doing behavior analysis for really 50 years, and I look back across that span, what I've enjoyed most is helping people. I think if anybody knew anything about the work I've done, they'd say any contribution I made was a researcher. But I fancy myself primarily as a teacher. And one reason that over the years I've worked in a bunch of different areas is because my students were interested in those areas, and working in those areas gave them opportunities to have good jobs, to have good lives, and moreover, to add something of value to the world, right? As some of those students became practitioners, they direct clinics, they work as consultants. Well, they've helped countless other people, right? They've helped clients.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that makes me feel good. Like when I see one of my students who's successful, and now many of them are retired, sad to say, and I see these people. You've had good careers, you've had good lives, and you've added something to the world. And if I've contributed a little bit to that happening, well, then that's something that pleases me.
Sure. Are there other, in your view, global problems that would be especially well suited to some sort of behavior analytic solution, but kind of remain underexplored or yet to be looked into?
Well, I think there's almost an endless array of existential crises that are facing us now. Climate change, but just rational thought, right? How do we get
Mm,
people to respond to evidence
mm,
and get people to detect nonsense? Because when you look at the way the United States, for instance, is configured today, there are two separate realities, at
right.
least. And people are convinced that their view of the world is veridical.
Mm,
And teaching skeptical thinking, that's what we all fall short in doing, I think, as a collective. And I think that the teaching skeptical thinking is important. Teaching people the meaning of the word enough
uh-huh.
is important. The constant desire for acquisition, for status, and so forth. That's not the route to happiness. The route to happiness is uh, being part of a community that you value and that values you. And people lose track of that. They see everything as a competition. Who's the champion? Who won the big plastic trophy? Well, you won it or I won it. Well, what are you going to do with it? Piss in the thing. That's about what it's worth. But
Yeah,
people lose track of that.
Yeah.
it's like material reinforcers lose their value quickly, and then people don't understand why they're still unhappy compared to experiences and community and interaction with others that like is ongoing reinforcement.
Another problem is just addiction. That relates to what you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, uh, we've had some interest in motivating operations over the years. And the joke I always make is, well, who's good at using motivating operations to change behavior? Capitalists, right?
Mm,
Yeah.
Advertisers. Like
yeah.
I could be watching a football game and I'll see an advertisement for something I didn't know existed. And I want to go out and buy the darn thing. Right? Like an
Yeah.
iPhone 31/17/4, which I've never heard about, right? Now,
Right.
because I've watched an ad, it's become a thing of great value. Yeah. Before we started meeting collectively, I was talking to Kyle, and I mentioned I used to do quite a bit of cross-country skiing, and I did some racing. And, like, I wasn't any good. I basically just did it to see if I could finish a long race. But that notwithstanding, I would often buy top-quality skis, right, the kind of skis that an Olympic skier should use. Like, somehow they would make me a good skier. Well, they never did.
Yeah.
I
But
used to
on
buy
the
the shoes that you pump up. That was mine
All the
as
pumps.
a
Yeah.
middle schooler. Yeah, I would pump them up because I'm from
Yeah.
Indiana. I thought I could play basketball, and turns out that it's not across everybody that's from Indiana is good at basketball.
No, not. It's interesting that basketball is one of two reasons I ended up going to college. Like, I grew up in Appalachia and in the coal fields, and nobody I knew went to college except my teachers. But I was a decent basketball player, not good, but decent. I had some small college offers, scholarships, and so I
Wow.
wanted to keep playing basketball. But I also didn't want to go to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
A- And so once I started college, I realized I was a better scholar than athlete. And that doesn't mean I was a great scholar, but then it just kind of went. I had some success, and there's just a whole lot of luck in the course
Yeah.
of our lives. I hated behavior analysis when I went to West Virginia for my
Really.
master's. I wanted to study animal behavior. Like, I've always loved the outdoors and uh, wildlife. And there was an old guy there, Gorman was his name, who fancied himself to be an animal behaviorist, and I wanted to work with him. But he wasn't taking any students. And there was a new guy, Andy Littell, right, who needed graduate students. So I was a default assignment to Andy. And of course, as you know, Andy's a great behavior analyst.
Mhm.
And I would argue with him. I would say, behavior analysis is garbage, right? I mean, it's black box psychology. Andy was very patient. And over the course of a year and a half, he convinced me to be a behavior analyst.
What was what did it for you? What kind of put you over that edge?
Uh, I think the empiricism, like, these were testable notions. I as an undergraduate, I somewhat fancied philosophy. I've always been fairly good with words, and that's mostly philosophy. But
Mm,
then I came to realize, well, that's all it is words, right? I mean, you can offer plausible accounts, but plausible and proven are very different.
sure.
And I like the database of behavior analysis, and also the fact that you could do something with it, right?
Mm,
If you're an Adlerian psychologist, well, you have archetypes. Okay, how you going to use that to help anybody, right? I
sure.
mean,
Yeah.
my archetype's broken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Advice for kind of the new generation of BCBAs. What are you in your advising and everything? What are you telling your students these days as far as um, advice or things they should be looking out for or their social impact?
Well, I think first, find something you enjoy, right? Find some aspect of behavior analysis that resonates for you, something that you do well, develop the skills you need, and then just keep sharpening those skills.
Mm,
But as you use those skills, keep your eyes open, right? I mean, there's all kinds of opportunities, but sometimes you have to step outside your comfort zone. And the best way to do that is to join a team, I mean, sort out like what you have to offer. And when you have a chance, offer it. Don't come up to people with your hat in your hand and say, hey, would you help me? Come up and say, hey, I have a little something to offer. Maybe we could work together. And a lot of times it comes to nothing. One thing I always tell my students is in science and in life in general, nobody cares about your batting average, right? It's just how many hits you have. When people look at the research, for instance, my students and other colleagues and I have done, well, they see what worked, right? What they don't see and what they don't care about is all the things that didn't work, and so resilience is critical. And that's where I think having a community is important. For instance, when you write grants, right? No matter how good you are, most of your grants aren't funded. And they're a lot of work, and it really sucks when you get one rejected. Well, if you work on a grant with colleagues, right, you can go out and have a drink and you can piss and moan and, criticize the reviewers and so forth. And then the next day you can go back to work.
Mm.
You can support one another. You can take the feedback seriously. If there are flaws in the work you did, well, make it better. And also realize that nobody cares about what you care about necessarily. One reason that I changed direction over the course of my career is the world changed. Like, I love behavioral pharmacology, and the big reason that we really downscaled it in is that it was hard to get grants to support research, and it was hard to get jobs in behavioral pharmacology.
Mm.
People could claim to be behavioral neuroscientists and maybe get a job, but I can't train behavioral neuroscientists. That's not what I am. I'm a behavioral pharmacologist. Travis Thompson, who was my PhD advisor and one of the pioneers in behavioral pharmacology, he closed his lab a few years before I essentially closed mine. I thought, if Travis Thompson can't succeed, right, then the writing's on the wall.
Mm.
And so, and I wish it hadn't been so, but I wish a lot of things hadn't been so. I think you have to be adaptable. You have to look at reality
Do
and
you
make.
attribute that to the predominant like medical model being just kind of the way society's going? Is that what you attribute that to, or what kind of led to that, do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's a big part of it. People um, have a lot of faith in this notion that behavioral issues are caused by diseases, right?
Mm.
And so if we can change the diseases, then we can change the behaviors, which are just symptoms of those diseases. Like, you really see that when you see how psychiatrists and other physicians talk about the effects of aripiprazole and risperidone. Those drugs are
Mhm.
FDA approved to treat, quote, irritability in people with autism spectrum disorder. Well, there's no such thing as irritability, right? It's just
Right.
challenging behavior. It's a circular
Mm.
explanation.
Sure.
But they think that these drugs are treating irritability, which, somewhere in the head, and it's the irritability that's causing people to uh, emit challenging behaviors. Well, surely something's happening in the head to produce those challenging behaviors, but we don't have any clue what that is. We didn't look
Yeah.
for that, right? We just look for the challenging behaviors.
Yeah, I
And
think all the studies that have suggested that, serotonin was playing a role because the early medications, seemed to affect things, and they were serotonin-based medications, and then all that research is showing, nope, it has nothing to do with serotonin. But these meds still work somehow, and it seems to still be a prevailing, view of everyone.
yeah, no, it is. Yeah, no, it is. And, you wish it were so. And oftentimes that model works, right? So you have a person with type 1 diabetes. Well, you have certain symptoms, right? Well, there's a cause of those symptoms, right? The beta cells in the pancreas have been destroyed by the immune system. Person doesn't produce insulin. Well, there are a bunch of sequelae to not producing insulin.
Mm.
So the treatment, pretty logical, right? Give the person insulin. And so the medical model, it's been invaluable when a disease can be isolated, right? When you can
Yeah.
ascertain the causal factors. But when it comes to behavior, nobody can explain what's happening in our brains or elsewhere in our bodies as we're sitting here talking, right? Just,
Sure.
I don't know if this is normal behavior. I'd like to think so, but we can't account for normal behavior physiologically, let alone abnormal behavior. And
Right.
Yeah,
that's not to
it's
disparage attempts to do so, but just to say, our current status of knowledge is just inadequate.
it is always frustrating going into a meeting. It happens a lot with the psychiatrist, and work mostly with physically aggressive, potentially dangerous individuals, and every medication that they can give them, whatever the blood test says, can I give them more? That's the most like what they're getting. And they're just cycling through the same medications over and over and over again, expecting it to work at some point. And I said, can we just please stop? First, if we titrate off so I can see where they're at baseline, that'd be great. But if you're
Yeah,
not willing to do that, at least don't touch anything while we see what we're doing and if that has an effect. That's all
absolutely.
I can ask, please. And sometimes they're willing and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they won't even talk to us. But
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, for years, effects of psychotropic medications in people with developmental disabilities was a big interest of mine. Like I've done quite a bit of writing in that area. I, I mean, I still do a little bit of it. For instance, we just published a chapter, but I kind of grew tired of it because nobody would listen.
Mm.
Right. I
yeah,
mean, basically, I made the same case that you made, Steve. Like, we need to be empiricists about this, right? I mean, are these medications working? And if they aren't, a person should be free of them. And this whole
yeah,
business of just adding drugs, right? Like witch's brews. Like, there's no logic whatsoever. It's just like more is better. But
Sure.
on the other hand, if you look at the demands placed on physicians, what else can they do, right? I mean, what can a doctor do to help us? They can give us surgery, they can give us drugs, or they can give us advice. And they don't have much advice to give us that's useful in the context of improving behavior. They could give us a referral, but they aren't usually inclined to do that. So, if you come in with your son or daughter and they're aggressive, right? You ask a psychiatrist for help. Well, the best game in town for them is, a drug. And given their
yeah,
training, and there is abundant evidence of a sort to indicate that medications can work. Now, whether it's a selective effect, I mean, that's
right.
another issue. But
Mm.
Yeah. I think another issue I've seen in that area is, and this is like from a family member's when it really, I caught wind of it, is general practitioners trying to fix issues with anxiety by giving out like benzodiazepines. And now you have an addiction issue on top of the anxiety that was originally there. And it just compounds and snowballs. And then maybe finally see a psychiatrist who's like, oh, we'll take you off this thing. Oh, your anxiety is worse. Let's give you these others. And now it's just, what was probably just needed some coping skills early on has become a full-fledged, mental health tragedy, really.
yeah, no, yeah, but great. No, I mean, it's an important topic, but it's a challenging topic because it's so easy to denigrate physicians, and they don't. Most of them, they don't have ill intent, right? I mean, they're doing the
Sure.
very best they can,
Sure.
Yeah,
and they think they're doing well. I mean, a big problem is the lack of assessment, right? I mean, it's assessment by anecdote. So,
Sure.
nobody's doing direct measures of behavior. They simply ask the parent, well, how's your son doing? Well, a little better. You
yeah,
know,
Yeah.
how's your daughter? Well, she had a good day. Okay, well, let's keep. Well, no, she had a bad day. Okay, well, let's up the dose or let's add something else. Well,
yeah. I
Right.
remember
Right.
as a teenager, I had some issues, mostly because I was being wild and crazy with my friends, and probably should have not been doing the things I was doing. But, you know, getting some trouble going, like, oh, the anxiety's too much. Well, it's probably because I got caught, and that's where the anxiety came from. But that's beside the point. Send you to a psychiatrist. You have to do that as part of being in trouble. All right, here's all these meds. Do you feel better or worse? I don't know. Okay, we'll give you more. I'm like, well, I don't want more. I'm great. I'm doing fine.
I'm good.
Everything
Yeah,
is
right,
golden. Like, and just get me out of this situation because I could see where it was going
right.
immediately.
Yep,
Like,
exactly. Yep. Well, and the thing I like to say, although it saddens me, is hope is a great enemy of reason. So if you're having a problem or if a loved one's having a problem, you want it to get better, right? So you seek treatment of any sort, whether it's behavior analysis or pharmacological treatment. You're really looking for indication that it works. So you have confirmation bias, right?
yeah,
And I think that plays a big role in this. And the people who are doing the prescribing, they have the same bias, right? Because they want to help people,
Sure. Yeah.
you know? So people maybe don't respond to unfavorable data in a absolutely rational way, right? They tend to dismiss the unfavorable data, and they look for any indication of success. Like, well, she
Yeah,
smiled. Well, yeah, okay, that's neat, but you know,
Right.
did anything.
yeah,
And I mean, behavior analysts can be guilty of the same thing. I think the place that we are, or at least ought to be grounded, is at our insistence on collecting data. But I've been involved in a couple projects recently where we've looked at what practicing behavior analysts actually do, and their work isn't as ably guided by data as you would hope it to be. Now,
Yeah.
what they have too much to do, right? Their caseloads are too big, and on
Mhm.
and on. Um, but this whole notion that we're always collecting good data and we're following those data, that's what we should be doing.
yeah. We have to rely on caregivers to collect data in group homes much of the time, and we know that it's not often good data, but we're only allotted maybe an hour or two a week with them, and so we just have to hope there's consistency in the inconsistency. You know what I mean? Like, if we're only getting 75% of the picture, hopefully it's the same 75% of the picture most of the time, and then we at least have a good idea.
Yeah, yeah, and you hope you're getting a big enough change in
Yeah,
behavior that you can detect it.
right.
But I mean, you really highlight a point I tried to make earlier, that you know uh, when you do something, you just have to recognize the resources at hand. I mean, you can't collect the kind of data you'd like to collect under the circumstances, where you're working, and I mean that's just the way of it. So you make it as good as you can make it, and then
Yeah.
you go from there.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. It's been amazing just hearing you
No,
speak
I've
on your
enjoyed it.
career
No, it's
and
been fun, and I've been incredibly fortunate. Like, I've had a long career, and uh, the 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 blessed part of it is just the people I've worked with. I mean, I've worked with a plentitude of really capable, competent people, and good people as well. Well-intentioned people, and I mean that's the part of it I've enjoyed, and it's a part of it I still enjoy. Now, I mean, of course, you run across some characters you wish you hadn't, but fortunately, I've been able to avoid most of them, and I've been wrong about some of them. I can think about some people that I really disliked and probably mistreated, truth be told. And I subsequently came to realize, that was my mistake, right? I
Mm,
misinterpreted that person. Or, like all people, they're flawed in one regard, but they have a whole bunch of offsetting strengths. So I've tried to not be unduly judgmental, but yet I'll close with this. You have to have some principles, right? I mean, you have to say that you know I know you may not be doing these things with ill intent, but these things should not be done, right? I mean,
mm,
this is simply wrong. And as a behavior analyst, we know that people do bad things because they have bad histories, but
right.
that doesn't change the fact that they're still bad things.
Yeah.
And then the question is, well, what do you do about it? And that's where it gets challenging,
Yeah.
at least for me.
It's been super interesting and really, really fun talking to you. Dr. Al Poling, thanks so much for joining Cooperant Learning today.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Take care. Good luck, everybody.